ago, Dan McGear, who's back there, called me up and said, we'd like you to do something for Theology on Tap. And I said, sure, I'm happy to. This is actually the first time I've done anything for Theology on Tap. And I said, well, what would you like? He said, oh, something on the devil. That's good. And I think he was thinking of a book I had written, and it's right here. It's available at Amazon.com. I'm not going to make this an infomercial, I promise. But this is a very good book. It's kind of neat because if you buy it for family and friends, and you hand them this book, whether it's Christmas or anniversary or a birthday, and you say, here's something I think you could use, something about the devil, it always gets a little rise out of that. So in any case, so Dan asked me to do it, and I'm happy to be here with you. I hope that as we do these reflections together, that it will be helpful to you. So maybe, actually, I want to start off by giving you a little bit of background about why I wrote this book. My whole priesthood has been involved in spiritual formation. I worked in the seminary for 22 years and then have been involved with ongoing formation for priests, and then spiritual direction with different people. And in the course of all of that, one of the deficits, I think, that I encountered was that I don't think when I say we, I'm talking about church overall, I don't think we have really addressed the dimension of struggle in the Christian life. I don't think we've done that adequately. Now, sometimes it's surprising because here you are, you're going through life, navigating life, and you think, I'm probably the only one, with this temptation or this struggle or whatever. But the fact of the matter is that this is universal experience, struggle in the Christian life. And so that was... On the other hand, when I told friends, when I was in the course of writing this book about the devil, they said, are you crazy? That's so medieval, so out of fashion, And then on the other hand, I got another reaction from some people that said, oh no, don't touch it. My sister-in-law, Sharon, who's just a wonderful person, said, that scares me. I don't even want to read it once you do it. So there are these two reactions of either dismissal because it seems to be some kind of quaint relic that's in the past, or it's something that people find very uncomfortable and frightening. And of course, Hollywood doesn't help either. I'm just taking a look at my notes here, and one of the things that we can talk about, in fact, what I hope to do is to give the presentation, allow you some time among yourselves to process whatever you'd like, and then we could have a dialogue. But there are, specific issues like, do you really believe in a personal devil? Do you believe in the devil? Is the devil really a person, or is this symbolic language? We can get into some of that stuff if you like later on. But what I want to suggest, for starters, is that we can begin with the sense that there is, as a part of our experience, an adversarial presence that wants to derail our journey to God. Now, that is important to identify. And I can say that this is verified in a lot of different ways. It's interesting, when I look at my own life, and I've been with people in spiritual direction, and we can get into trouble on our own. Have you noticed that? We have the capacity on our own to get into trouble. But sometimes it's a stretch, and you feel like there's something here that's much more than the mischief that I can come up with. And that's part of that experience of the adversarial presence in our lives. And that is not simply limited to personal experience. I had a course that I taught for a number of years, probably emotionally one of the most wrenching courses I ever taught. And it had a really snappy title. It was called Interiority and Catastrophe. And the course was about the spiritual literature from the Second World War. I don't know if you're aware of this, but there's a considerable body of spiritual literature that emerged from World War II. And it cuts across. It's Jewish, it's Protestant, and it's Catholic. And these people who were thoughtful and reflective and spiritual were immersed in this one catastrophic experience. Now, part of this was the opportunity that I had to delve deeply into the Holocaust. And when I did that, and my students too, I think they would echo the same experience, what happened was we encountered in that history something which was much more than the sum of human malice. We encountered in that history of the Holocaust something, someone that was intelligent and powerful and concealed and absolutely destructive. Something that unleashed forces of annihilation that are really actually beyond human imagination. Sadly enough, that same dynamic is continued, in the Middle East today, in some respects. So there is something there that is more than the sum of human malice. So when people say, well, do you believe? I say, well, I think I know from my own experience, but also from larger experience. And we're talking, again, not simply about a personal struggle, but sometimes this adversarial presence getting embedded, and I'll talk about this in a little while, in some of the structures of our life and our society at large. So, let me just see, what else here? Oh, yeah, one other thing I want to mention about this more generalized sense of evil. I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but no pope in modern history has spoken more about the devil than Pope Francis. Were you aware of that? I mean, it's amazing. And if you take a look at his recent encyclical, Laudato Si, on the environment, and it's really not people mistake this thing about climate change. There are pieces of that in there, but it's really about an integral ecology that involves humanity overall in this home that we call the earth. But you begin to see there how he's able to pinpoint the way in which evil can insinuate itself in the very structures of our life and societies. So if you're interested in the devil, you're in good company. Pope Francis is a good guy. He's very insightful, and so let me begin. And what I'm going to do is kind of give you an overall view. And I think there's a triple message in this. The first one is don't be surprised. Don't be surprised by the struggle that you may face personally, the struggle that may be embedded in your own social circles, or the struggle that is also a part of this world. The second message is don't feel alone, because again, as I said earlier, we're in this together. And the most important part of this triple message is don't lose hope. And I'll try to talk a little bit about that. It's a little hot in here, I know. That's probably appropriate for the topic. Are you okay though? Relatively comfortable? You know what, may I take off my collar? You know I'm a priest, right? Okay. And once I start getting into this topic, I can really get kind of wound up. But in any case, there is also a, and again, this is kind of like an overall perspective. There's a positive result of this struggle. And that is a deeper dependence on the Lord. If we really are able to recognize the challenges and the struggles that are a part of our life and a part of our society, and we recognize that there are powers there that would want to derail our life's journey and our world for that matter, what that does, thank you for it. You can just put it down there. What that does is it pushes us to greater dependence on the Lord. Now remember, every day, I hope you pray the Lord's Prayer every day. I hope you do. But if you do, every day, at the end, you're saying, lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Now, there's an interesting little thing about that last invocation, deliver us from evil, because that can also be translated as deliver us from the evil one. So it's not just evil in general, but deliver us from evil. And then there's that prayer that the priest says after the Our Father in the Mass. Deliver us, O Lord, we pray, from every evil. Grant peace in our day, that by the help of your mercy we may be always free from sin and safe from all distress, as we await the blessed hope and coming of our Savior, Jesus Christ. So this way of praying says an awful lot about the reality of the Christian life. Okay, so in the book, and I'm just going to kind of give you a quick reprise of this, what I do is I highlight the 4 works of the devil, and I think they covers just about everything. And they are deception, division, diversion, and discouragement. You got that? You can't forget it. You won't. You're going to be tested at the end. Deception, division, diversion, and discouragement. Let me go through those and explain a little bit about them. So let's start with deception. The devil is known as the father of lies. And for good reason. The first representation in the Scripture is Genesis 3, and that encounter with Adam and Eve. And the devil makes a promise to them. There's all this nice stuff in the garden here, and there's that tree, and God said don't eat from it. But the reason is that if you do eat, you'll be like gods yourselves. So it's a promise coupled with a lie. Right? So that's how it all starts and how it begins to unfold. There is that dynamic of deception. Now, that continues. And it continues in lots of different ways. Sometimes it goes in surprisingly subtle ways. For example, in the use of language. Just before this started, I was talking with someone about these videotapes from Planned Parenthood. I'm sure you're familiar with this. And even in the whole question of abortion, the language keeps shifting so that you've got talk about fetal tissue. Well, those are organs of a baby that's being formed. By the way, I don't know if you saw today's Tribune. There's a great cartoon on the editorial page, and it's of a fetus, a child in the making in the womb, and then there's a little talk box, and it says, "I don't remember giving my consent for organ donation." It gets the point. And it's but what you have here you see, is an inversion of language. And that is a sign of great deception. But there are other deceptions of modern life that we encounter all the time. Another one that I kind of woke up to was the deception that would say information equals truth. Let me explain that, because we live in an information-driven society. I suspect that just about everybody here is involved in one way or another with computers and information and maybe your work day by day. And there's a presupposition that the more information you have, the more truth you have. But that's not true. There's a great deal of difference between information, which can be neutral, it can be a means of control, and that can be good or bad, but it's never something you can just live by, give your life to, even die for. But that confusion of information and truth. There's another, in this modern world, another kind of deception that's subtle and also, I think, ultimately destructive. And that is the way that the pressing social issues that we have to deal with get so complicated that we stand before them and say, well, nothing can be done. That's a deception. When you think about it, there's some, like in this country, some huge things. No matter where you line up on the political spectrum, I think if you're a caring Christian, you would want to say sick people should be helped. That's pretty clear. Now, how you go about organizing that is another thing. But how is it that we have kind of walked into this morass that leads us to say this is impossible? That's a deception that comes out of certain kinds of complications. And there are other examples too, even on the whole question of immigration in this country. It gets so complicated. You say, well, we can't do anything. Well, that's a deception by way of complication. So you see what I mean? This whole notion of deception can take on many different forms, and those are some examples. Let me go on to the next work of the devil. So that's the first one, deception. The second one is division. Division. And this really, when you're talking about the devil, this hits home. So the Greek word for devil is diabolos. And you know that, right? Okay? It comes from two words in Greek. Dia, balein. Now, dia means through. Balein is the word to throw. And that's where we get the word ballistic. So the diabolos is the one that throws through, divides, separates, breaks things and people up. So it's kind of it's interesting, isn't it, how a name captures a very important part of the human experience that is, it's embedded in our history and our struggles. This fracturing that would take hold of us and ultimately lead us in very dark paths. And that division that's done by the pull to division, that is the work of the devil, sometimes it starts in a pretty personal way with the divided self. St. Paul, this is in chapter 7 of his letter to the Romans. He says, I don't understand myself. The good I want to do, I don't do. The evil I would rather avoid, I end up doing. Who's going to save me from this? So he's feeling at a very deep level a kind of inner division and a pull inside. And that's a kind of vulnerability that we all have that can sometimes can be really very, very destructive. But this division also then takes on another coloring, and that is in our interpersonal life. Have you ever noticed, maybe in an office or in a school or in a factory, how things can just kind of begin? You get, all of a sudden, you're having splits and divisions and fracturing, and no one's quite sure how this is happening, and it certainly doesn't help. It doesn't help. In fact, it leads people down a primrose path. But then even on the larger macro social scale, there are huge pulls to division. When you think about racism in our society, and when you think about even the use of religion, which has become very much in evidence today, that becomes a force to divide, to split, to break, and it gets entirely perverted. This is a very powerful and important work of the evil one. The third work is diversion. So we started deception, division, diversion. And let me explain that and illustrate it very concretely. Every first Sunday of Lent, we hear about the temptations of Jesus. And really very interesting. He goes out to the desert. He fasts for 40 days and 40 nights. And the gospel writers say he was very hungry after that. And the tempter approaches him and says, you're hungry. You got the power. Turn these stones into bread. Or he says, look at all the kingdoms of the world. Here's a shortcut. I'll give them to you if you fall down and worship me. Or he says, takes him to the top of the temple and says, you're supposed to be a suffering Messiah, but if you throw yourself off the top of the temple, you will make such a splash and wow the crowds that you won't have to go through all that suffering, that agony, that pain. What is the work of the devil in that context? It's a diversion. Jesus is called to be a loyal son of the Father, a suffering Messiah who, by taking on our suffering, transforms our suffering into new life. And the temptation that he experiences is a diversion, to move off course. And this kind of thing actually has all kinds of contemporary manifestations. We can easily get diverted. We can get unfocused. Some of the things that are meant to bring us together can do that very easily. I don't know if you've probably seen this scene of a family around a table, and no one's really looking at each other or talking to each other. They're diverted from that by looking at their phone. What happens? People are unfocused. And so this is a very powerful kind of temptation and work. Let me go on then to the last work here of discouragement, because this is particularly important. We talked about deception, division, diversion, now discouragement. And this goes back a long way, the way this has been named in our Christian spiritual history. I'm not sure how aware you are of this, but in the early church, the early centuries after the persecutions, there were men and women who really wanted to embrace the Christian life in a kind of radical way. And for some of them, this meant going out to the desert, leading a very intense life of prayer, of asceticism, of intercession, of contact with God's Word. It was a way in which they felt they could really move on their spiritual journey. And one of the fruits of that experience of the mothers and the fathers of the desert was that they were also very attentive to the different spiritual movements that were going on in their life. they were able to identify temptations with great precision. And one of the great temptations that they identified the capital sins, lust and gluttony and all the rest. But one of them they identified as acedia, which is often but incorrectly translated as sloth. You've been to Lincoln Park Zoo, a sloth, just kind of like on its side, doing nothing, laziness. Well, yeah, there's a place for laziness, but that's not the power of this temptation of acedia. Acedia comes from a Greek word, akadeo, which means I don't care. I don't care. And the temptation took hold of these desert mothers and fathers as they went out to the desert. It's also called the noonday devil, because this temptation occurred after they had been on their spiritual journey for a while, in the same way that it can happen to us. So here's how it played out. They would be on the spiritual journey for some time, and then at a certain point, this presence, this voice, this temptation would manifest itself to them in three different ways. And the first one was this. It was a voice of discouragement that said, you've come out here, you've given it a good shot. You really have. You're depriving yourself of sleep, of food, you're reading the Bible, you're praying. But you know what? Take a look at yourself. You really haven't changed all that much. Be honest. You haven't changed. So why don't you just go back to your old way of life? Because this didn't work. That's the first form of acedia. The second, and these are related, is that again, after being on the spiritual journey for a while, the voice, the presence, the temptation comes forward. You've come out here, and actually, you've done pretty well. You're a little bit better. Not perfect, but you're a little bit better. But, it's always in the but you could do so much better if you did something else. So why don't you leave this little enclosure, for example? Go start visiting the other hermits. Form a committee. Develop a program. You see? And it's a discouragement in the sense that it's saying you can always do more by doing something else. And instead of going back, regressing, it's going elsewhere. But then the third form of the temptation, again, after people have been on the journey for a while, the voice comes. You've been out here. You have given it your best shot. You are unchanged. You will never change. Give up. Just give up, because nothing is going to happen. So those are the three forms. Regress, divert, just be paralyzed.
Is that part of the dark night of the soul?
That's a little bit different. Well, I'll get to that though. If you want, I can talk more about that in a little bit. Now the interesting thing about this is that that's a personal temptation, but it's also a collective one. For example, when you think about the exodus of Israel from Egypt, so God with Moses leading the people takes them on the journey to freedom, to the promised land. But after they've been on the journey for a while, the people start complaining to Moses and say, we're out in this desert. Where is this going? We may have been slaves in Egypt, but we knew the work, we had the food, we had the routines. Why don't we just go back? Again, that's a temptation for regression. It also took another form too. At a certain point, Moses was up on the mountain, and he wasn't coming down. And the people said, we don't know where he's at. Is he going to really lead us? So they forced his brother Aaron to say, well, let's do something else. Let's build a golden calf. It's another way of responding. And then finally, they also collectively experienced the temptation to just paralysis. Sit down in the desert and die. So these are the forms of acedia, the forms of this kind of discouragement that can take hold. And this is, according to the tradition of the church, the mothers and the fathers of the desert and spiritual writers, this is the most dangerous temptation. And the reason is it threatens to derail everything, because it's the temptation to give up entirely. Now, what do we do with this? I mean, I've led you into the depths of temptation. Can we get out of it? Yes, I hope so. What it is, it's going to happen not on our own power, not on our own steam, but through our faith and through our connection with Jesus Christ. And you're going to hear a certain kind of familiar ring. So if the first temptation is deception, think about the words of Jesus in John's Gospel at the Last Supper. I am the way, the life, and the truth. Attachment to Him brings us to a kind of clarity and a kind of truth that enables us to cut through the deceptions. Paul is good at this in his different letters to different communities. And then with regard to division, think about the night before he dies, again in John's Gospel, chapter 17, when he's really praying from his heart. What does he pray for? What is the central petition that he prays for? He says, Father, may they be one as we are one, I and you and me, so that the world may believe. And if you were listening to the letter to the Ephesians last Sunday, He is our bond of peace. He made the two one. What about diversion? Well, if we're with Him, we're sharing His mission, and we will not be diverted. And what about discouragement? He is our source of hope, and so we can move forward. So let me pull this also in another direction, because I want to go back. What is the MO, the modus operandi, the way of operating on the part of this adversarial presence we call the devil? And the first thing that I think people don't take into account is that it is not to frighten us. The devil does not want to frighten us. What good would that do? That's not economical. It's not economical. Because to frighten us means that we would be on guard and we would run away and we would surrender ourselves even more completely to God. So the devil doesn't, contrary to everything in Hollywood, the devil doesn't want to frighten us. You've got to get that straight. That's really important. The second thing is that the devil does not want to be obvious. Not want to be obvious. What's the most effective way you can derail anything? It's not blatantly by coming in and trying to take hold of things, but it's by subtly insinuating yourself, seamlessly working yourself in to life and to situations and into relationships. A third piece of this modus operandi is that the devil does not suggest anything that is clearly evil. Now let me explain that, because this is just really important. When we are tempted, when we're pulled, as the devil wants to do, pull us away from God, it's never under the guise of doing something explicitly evil. It's always under the guise of something good, always disguised as a good. And whether that's a pleasure or a power or whatever, it's going to be always under the guise of a good. And then another piece of this modus operandi, you know the old proverb, idleness is the devil's workshop. Let me tell you, that's not true. That is not true. In fact, the devil doesn't want us to rest. Because if we rest, and if we're alert to our own lives, we're going to be aware. If, on the other hand, we keep moving and spinning and going from one thing to the next and never have that Sabbath time that would enable us to get perspective, we're in, I was going to say, in his hands. If you noticed, I've been avoiding using pronouns. In some places, I will refer to the devil as she, to be inclusive. That didn't get real good responses. But in any case, so the idea is not to let us rest, not to let us have that kind of perspective. And certainly the devil does not want us to pray, because prayer is going to put us in relationship with God. But not only that, prayer will eventually reveal the truth of ourselves and the truth of the situation in which we find ourselves in this world. And so, for whatever reason, there'll be a push away. You know what? You don't have time. You can do that later. There are always a lot of excuses, but there will be that push away from prayer. And another thing, too, in this modus operandi, is the devil will do whatever is possible to keep us from being grateful. To keep us from being grateful. Because once we are able to identify the various gifts, the graces, what God has done, the great things God has done in our lives, then we will be transformed. But if we are forgetful or ungrateful, we are much more pliable to the suggestions that our adversary would give us. So the point is, single-mindedly to try to get us to push back and away from God, and to do that in a lot of different ways. Walter Casper is a cardinal, and he's written a number of things, and I found something that he said so helpful. He was writing about the devil, Satan, evil spirit, whatever your terminology you want to use. And he said the Christian's attitude before that, it's not fright, it's not fear, it's not a discouraging sense, but it's confidence. Because we hear in our heads echoing over and over again, Jesus saying, again at the Last Supper, have confidence. I have conquered the world. As long as we have that connection, we're okay. Now, we're at, looks like 7:34 and 30 seconds. And what I would propose is maybe a few minutes talking, and meanwhile, if you want to get up and get a snack and then come back, and then we can have a larger dialogue, pick up on some questions that you might have, or not only questions, but observations, personal encounters with the devil, if anybody's so inclined to give witness, but whatever, and then we can go on till about 8 o'clock or so. Sound okay? All right? So why don't you start talking, and if you want to get something else to drink or eat, feel free to do so. Maybe not, I wasn't entirely clear, is that fear would repel us, but the actual operation of the adversary, this evil adversary that wants to derail us, is more seduction. Does that make sense? So just a clarification. A second question came up about confidence and the need we have for confidence. confidence in ourselves and confidence in God as we would face these various pulls and temptations or struggles and so forth. And I think that's a really very important point in this sense, that when people are lacking in confidence, they can seek to fill that up in ways that are not necessarily good. You can see this happening with people who act out sexually. I mean, what's often behind that is not necessarily something that is primarily sexual, but in fact it's a way of building up self-esteem and confidence. So that question of confidence and where we find our confidence is terrifically important as a part of this whole process of engaging the spiritual journey with integrity. And then there was another question about, and I'm not sure if I'll be able to answer this very well, about psychotropic medication. And there are lots of prescriptions, and they are helpful for people to deal with certain issues in life, whether it's depression or anxiety or whatever. But does that medication in itself present some kind of a danger? One of the things that I found very helpful is the distinction between the goal of psychology, and I would put include in that psychiatry, in contrast to the goal or the purpose of spirituality and spiritual formation. So the psychological and psychiatric assistance that probably all of us need at one time or another is going to help us to live life more efficiently and to adjust and to adapt to the circumstances of our life. But one of the things that a psychological or psychiatric approach or a medication can never provide is the reason for living, the purpose that we have, the destiny that is given to us. That moves us into another realm, you see. So they're related, but they're not the same. And I don't know if the question came there. Is that helpful? Okay, good. Well, let's open it up. Are there any, please?